Thank you very much. We'll be standing for our prayer from Professor.
Unless the Lord builds the house, the builders labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the guards stand watch in vain. In vain you rise early and stay up late, toiling for food to eat, for he grants sleep to those he loves. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we want to thank you this morning for this gathering. We want to thank you for the vision you have given to our leaders to build. We want to thank you for the tenacity of purpose, and we want to thank you for the people-centered approach. This morning, we seek your wisdom as we build. We thank you for every investor that is here, contributing to the building of our nation, Zimbabwe, building of our education systems. May you draw all that would contribute positively to our nation. May you give them good hearts. We want to pray for each and every deal that will happen even this morning, that it will make our nation prosperous. We want to thank you and seek your blessing for the negotiations that will take place today, that it will result in a prosperous nation. We thank you for this stage in our nation, and we pray that you will be with us as we build with you. In the name of Jesus Christ, we seek your blessings. Amen.
Thank you very much. May we take our seats. Your Excellency, all protocol observed. My name is Lamek Mjigwa from the Ministry of Higher and Tertiary Education, Science and Technology Development. I wish to welcome you all to this important gathering. Indeed, you are all aware Zimbabwe is open for business. May I invite now our Director of Ceremonies, Professor Bebe, to take, to lead us in these proceedings. Thank you very much.
Your Excellency, the President of the Republic of Zimbabwe and Chancellor of State Universities, Comrade E.D. Mnangagwa, the Minister of Higher and Tertiary Education, Science and Technology Development, Honorable Professor Amon Murira, Chairperson of the ruling party, Comrade Opa Mchinguri Kashiri, the Minister of State for Provincial Affairs in Harare, the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee on Higher and Tertiary Education, Science and Technology Development, heads of diplomatic missions, the Chief Secretary represented here, I think, by Colonel Katandye, retired, Permanent Secretary for Higher and Tertiary Education, Science and Technology Development, Dr. Svanda, and other heads of ministries here present. Governor of the Reserve Bank is present, I think he is. Chairman of Zimbabwe University's Vice Chancellors Association, Professor Edimwenje, and other Vice Chancellors here present. Principals of teachers' colleges and polytechnics, heads of parastatals, captains of industry, and representatives of business community here present, student leaders from higher and tertiary institutions, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, comrades and friends. We are gathered here this morning for a very important conference on infrastructural development in universities. Without much ado, please allow me to invite our Permanent Secretary, Dr. Svanda, to give us a brief background and objectives of the conference. Dr. Svanda.
Thank you very much, Bebe. They call him Emeritus Professor, one of the doyens of education in Zimbabwe. Your Excellency, the President of the Republic of Zimbabwe and Chancellor of State Universities, Comrade E.D. Mnangagwa, the Emeritus Professor has allowed me to say all protocol observed. Let me start by welcoming you all to Zimbabwe's first higher and tertiary education investment infrastructure conference. This is a historic conference being organized in line with the current thrust of attracting investment into the country. The Ministry of Higher and Tertiary Education, Science and Technology Development joins His Excellency the President and other ministries and government departments and the private sector in attracting investment into the country. Our aim is to build solid education infrastructure to promote inclusive and quality education in Zimbabwe. My brief this morning is to give you the objectives and purposes of this meeting. The purpose of this meeting is to improve the learning environment of students in universities and tertiary education institutions. We believe that higher education prepares for the construction of a knowledge economy in line with His Excellency inauguration statement. We believe, as we have stated, Your Excellency, that higher education plays an important and catalytic role in the social and economic development of Zimbabwe. As we have seen through the experiences of other countries that have achieved very high economic growth rates, such as Brazil, China, India, Korea, Singapore, and many other industrialized countries. According to His Excellency's speech at his inauguration ceremony, we must position higher education to be at the center of economic growth and to be the driver for the development and international competitiveness. There is need, therefore, to put up state-of-the-art infrastructure, state-of-the-art research facilities, and modern laboratories. Put up industrial parks to address the problems of industrialization and modernization in our universities and institutions of higher learning. We need also to invest in efficient and effective student educational financial schemes to cover their needs for accommodation, tuition, and student welfare as they pursue their education. The Ministry, Your Excellency, appreciates the problem of fiscal space as indicated in the 2018 budget appropriation that 80% is for employment costs, 6.5% for operations and maintenance, leaving only 13% for capital expenditure. Therefore, this conference is looking for other innovative ways of financing education in line with the Sustainable Development Goal number 4, which seeks to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. In accordance with the foregoing, we are holding this first higher and tertiary education infrastructure conference to support the students' education in Zimbabwe. We have, Your Excellency, invited domestic and international investors in educational infrastructure and student loan financing to invest in Zimbabwe's higher and tertiary education system. Specifically, Your Excellency, the objectives of this higher and tertiary education infrastructure investment conference are as follows. First, to mobilize resources for higher and tertiary educational institutions in Zimbabwe. Secondly, and specifically, to mobilize resources for higher and tertiary education institutions to complete outstanding works which were stalled due to lack of fiscal space. Third, to engage local and international investors on possible funding solutions to higher and tertiary education infrastructure and challenges facing students' loan financing schemes. Fourthly, to establish stakeholder buy-in and support of the infrastructure student loan grant facilities. And fifthly, to mobilize diaspora funding to support infrastructure needs of higher and tertiary education institutions and student financing, and to enable the diaspora community to invest into our education system. I'm glad that, Your Excellency, we have a number of diaspora investors, some coming as far as United Kingdom, some from South Africa. The conference, Your Excellency, will include presentations and commitments by construction companies, fund managers, and investors in higher and tertiary institutions, as well as presentations by representatives of higher and tertiary institutions who will present their infrastructure needs. Presentations will also include actual feasibility studies that have been undertaken to address the higher and tertiary education infrastructure deficits. We expect solid commitments to improve our infrastructure in our universities and tertiary institutions. We expect solid commitments and investment into the infrastructure sector and student loan financing. This is an investment conference for promoting inclusive education. In conclusion, one may ask, what are the benefits of this conference? One, to the investor, the conference is saying Zimbabwe is open for investment in the educational infrastructure. To the institutions of higher and tertiary institutions of learning, we need to attract investment into our education sector. To the students and their representatives gathered here this morning, this conference is saying government is committed to making you obtain the highest quality of education. To the vice chancellors and principals and all educationists in this conference, the conference is saying, let us create conducive investment climate to attract investment, to transform our educational institutions, to grow the economy through educational investment. Finally, to all of us who are gathered here this morning, the counsel that you received from the Bible to all infrastructure builders is found in Psalms 127, verse 1. And it says, unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain that build it. Let us pray for the success of this meeting and success of our economy. May God bless you. I thank you.
Comrades and friends, allow me now to invite our Honorable Minister, Professor Amon Murira, Minister of Higher and Tertiary Education, to come and address us on the vision of the ministry concerning infrastructural development in this country, in our higher education institutions. Comrade Minister.
Thank you very much, Emeritus Professor. Your Excellency, the President of the Republic of Zimbabwe and Chancellor of all state universities, Comrade Emerson Dambudzo Mnangagwa, the Chairperson of the ruling party, who is also the Minister of Environment, Water and Climate, Comrade Osizet Muchinguri Kashiri, Minister of State for Provincial Affairs in Harare Metropolitan Province, Honorable Miriam Chikukwa, and other honorable ministers here present, the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee on Higher and Tertiary Education, Science and Technology Development, heads of diplomatic missions, Chief Secretary to the President and Cabinet, who is represented here by retired Keno Katsante, Permanent Secretary in my ministry, Dr. Desire Mtizes Banta, and other heads of ministries here present, Governor of the Reserve Bank, Acting Chief Executive Officer of ZimChair, Dr. Chikuya, Chairman of Zimbabwe Universities Vice Chancellors Association, Professor Edimwenje, and other vice chancellors here present. Heads of parastatals, directors, and directors in the public service, principals of polytechnics, teachers' colleges, captains of industry, student leaders from higher and tertiary institutions, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, comrades and friends. Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, we are gathered here basically to construct the future that we desire. We have always said we construct the future that we want. Our focus basically is to produce graduates who in turn produce goods and services. For knowledge which cannot be transformed into goods and services is not relevant at all. Your Excellency, we have a big vision of higher and tertiary education institution towns or cities. We are also envisioning universities and colleges as revenue centers and not cost centers for government, which is currently obtaining. We must use our advantage of high literacy, which is over 90%, to bring in foreign direct investment through high quality education that is a product and service orientation. But in order to achieve this, we need to construct modern infrastructure to create an inspiring environment for nurturing and mentoring our students, so that when we retire happily when they are busy constructing another future for us. We have always said, let's be selfish enough to train our students adequately so that when we rest, we know the country is in good hands. Modern accommodation infrastructure of our students and staff is a priority. We are envisaging shopping malls and office parks and industrial parks that are linked to our universities and colleges. This we do it with our investment partners in a BOT, BOOT, and PPP models, and whatever is desirable. University towns or college towns will be a whole ecosystem evolving around opportunities provided by the students and communities nearby. Innovation hubs are also a priority area for the ministry and for you, Your Excellency, as the head of all these institutions. And we are saying private sector participation in these projects is highly welcomed. The government respects property rights and non-interference where private capital has been utilized. Financing of students using financial institutions is a major priority. I see vast opportunities for the construction industry, real estate, financial services, and many other opportunities being created by the opportunity of accommodation shortages at our universities and colleges. So we are envisioning construction zones in our universities and higher and tertiary institutions. We know for sure that the ministry is responsible for higher and tertiary education, science and technology development, as well as their linkages in delivering a modern and industrialized Zimbabwe. We can do this through facilitating a learning environment through the provision of adequate infrastructure, by adopting scientific technologies and other technologies that make Zimbabwe competitive in the 21st century and beyond. Setting up spin-off industries. Implement a programmatic approach in education, science, and technology development. For where there is no program, there is confusion. We always say it's tibula wa tibula. when there is no program. We want to develop an inclusive higher and tertiary education system that is rooted in our heritage and culture, in the delivery of goods and services. And I will explain. Zimbabwe's heritage is rich mineral resources. Zimbabwe's heritage is a good climate for agriculture. Zimbabwe, therefore, must have its expertise in these key areas where our heritage is well defined. We know if you are in Switzerland, you must be very good in snow technology. When you are in Zimbabwe, we expect that we be very good in mining technology, in agricultural technology, and other modern technologies. So this is what we mean by a curricula that is based on our heritage. We can't specialize on things that we don't have, for we cannot be experts in that. We want to develop a responsive curricula that is based on explicit bodies of knowledge. At the end of a degree or a certificate, there must be a promise of competencies that are computed and can be proven. In doing this, we want to do this with honesty, with humility, and with always the issue of saying we don't want any confusion. We want to follow programs. We want win-win arrangements between ourselves and our investors. Ladies and gentlemen, and we want to do this very cleanly. And as the president always says, no corruption. Economics, 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 then politics. Siyabonga, tatenda, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Honorable Minister, for that most inspiring oration. I'm sure that vision is going to be translated very, very soon into action, especially that we have got representatives with the wherewith to translate it. And so that now it is my pleasure indeed to invite Ms. Aramangi, Deputy Divisional Director, Investment Banking, CBZ, to come and talk about CBZ on funding options for higher and tertiary education, putting in action our vision.
Thank you, Professor. Good morning. His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Zimbabwe and Chancellor of all state universities, Comrade Emerson Mnangagwa, I've been asked to dispense with all protocols, so I'll say all protocols observed. As CBZ, we are quite excited that we are part of this very important initiative to revolutionize student education, particularly as it relates to infrastructure development, student accommodation, staff accommodation, and related infrastructure. So we are very grateful to the ministry for this opportunity to facilitate the inflow of investment into this very important sector. My presentation will be outlined as follows. Right, it will be outlined as follows. There will be the background, and we are also looking at what are the funding requirements of state institutions related to tertiary education. We are also looking at the investment in terms of what is it that the investors require to be put in place so that they are confident that they will put in their money and they will also get their money back at the end of the investment period. We are also looking at the funding options. What I'm going to present is by no means exhaustive, but we are prepared to look at other options that can come from investors. Then we are also looking at the engagement process or framework, where what are the steps that investors will need to take into account the state tertiary institutions as well, for them to come up with an investment solution to their funding needs. Then, of course, there will be an opportunity to give you more information in terms of what we have prepared for investors to look at. We've prepared a handbook which has been distributed to a number of people, but it also be uploaded on the website of the Ministry of Education, so that those who would want to read, they can read it at their leisure. So just a brief background of CBZ. Who are we? We are a diversified financial institution which is listed on the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange. We cut across the financial services in terms of core banking, insurance, asset management, and property management as well. We have got a sizable balance sheet of about over 2 billion, which makes it possible for us to underwrite sizable transactions in the economy, and I think we've participated and partnered government in terms of economic development, so it's not a new area in our space. We also give you just a quick overview of the structure of CBZ, the portfolios that we are involved in, the various businesses and the products that we also offer to the investing public. The next stage relates to CBZ. We are the lead financial advisors to the ministry and to the tertiary institutions in terms of fundraising. And just a high-level view of the activities that we'll be undertaking related to documentation, related to investor engagements. We'll be assisting the ministry and the tertiary institutions in terms of how they engage the investors on basis of best practice international standards. We're also looking at investor due diligence because we would not want a situation where fly-by-night investors come in, they promise heaven on earth, but at the end of the day, there's nothing that comes through. So we will be able to do that due diligence and advise government and tertiary institutions, and of course, we'll move on to financial closure, which is what everyone will be looking at, because that's where the real work begins when we start having the dollars flowing through. The next level is we have, with our partners, Dawn Properties, undertaken a feasibility study, which has basically brought out the various funding needs for all tertiary institutions, as I indicated, from student accommodation to the learning facilities. And we have come up with a tentative figure of about 3.1 billion for all the requirements for all the institutions. And the tertiary institutions have also said we have priorities for our institutions, which amount to 1.1 billion. So those are what one would call low-hanging fruits, which our investors would want to look at, and they are clearly explained in the handbook that I spoke about. The next slide there, I'll skip it because our partners, Dawn Properties, will specifically look at that. The next stage, which is very key, is what is it that the investors would want to have in place so that they can put their dollars with confidence. So we have quite a universe there. They want to be assured of security of their investment. I think the professor highlighted that that's an issue that government is basically put in place where property rights are protected and are respected. We're also looking at the investment or the asset that is being invested in should have capacity to generate cash flows. Cash flows which will be able to repay, to pay interest on a regular basis, to repay capital as per the financial covenants. We're also looking at an enabling regulatory environment where we have got all the regulators putting in place the approvals that would allow the investors to put in their money without any hindrance. Also looking at return on investment. Obviously, every investor would want to put money in return for something that is sustainable. And we have carried out, as I said, a feasibility study that looks at each institution, what is it that the investment or the assets that are being invested in will return to the investor. Our colleague from Dawn Properties will be the next to present, so you basically clearly explain that. The next slide looks at funding options. What are the issues, what are the options that are available for investors? What are the options that are available for the institutions? As I indicated in my opening remarks, we have highlighted 3 there, but they are by no means exhaustive. So there can be combinations of all those options, debt instruments, which is the traditional. And I think all the institutions have traveled this road because the balance sheets are not that strong. It's a bit limiting, but it's an area that can be pursued on an ongoing basis, as we have also been doing. The next exciting area is to do with triple Ps. There's already an enabling act, joint venture act, which basically takes investors through the processes that will enable them to invest in infrastructure development in a triple P environment. Then we also have equity participation. These are accommodation around universities that are standalone, not really tied to the university, but of course providing accommodation to students. I'll quickly go through. I've been told that I have to cut down on the presentation. Dr. Sibanda told me several times that when you go to London, it's straight to the point. So I'll try to do that. So debt instruments, as I indicated, this is what institutions have been doing. But what is key for investors to be attracted is what are the concessions that, one, the institutions are going to give, two, government is going to give. So we are looking at prescribed asset status. This is mainly for our local investors because it's a requirement that we have to invest in such instruments. So it will be very good, and we know government through Ministry of Finance have basically given their support that all the concessions that investors would want will be made available at the shortest possible time. Government guarantee, tax exemptions, those will also be key, but as you know, debt instruments, they are more on the short term, yet the investment we are looking at is more on the long term, which brings us to the next slide, which deals with triple Ps. This is going to be exciting because those investors that are looking at long-term funding, long-term investment, will find this to be very, very attractive. But more importantly, it's also important as a benefit to students because the kind of rentals that they have to pay, because this is an investment that's long-term, it will be much lower. So we are hoping that investors that are gathered here and those that we are engaging will be able to partner individual state universities, tertiary entities in this area. And we are also looking at incentives because that is what attracts investment into different areas, tax incentives, tax breaks, national project status, and all related incentives that incentivize investors. The next slide is more specifically looking at joint venture arrangements. Who are the major players in that? We are looking at debt financiers, we are looking at investors. From an equity perspective, We're also looking at, I see a lot of building suppliers here. There's a discussion I had before with a brick manufacturer who said, I can bring in my bricks as equity. So that's an option that universities can also look at. Tertiary institutions will also come in with their land, because I know that you have got a lot of land which you can leverage on in terms of coming into to the play. Then the next level is, how are we going to engage? Engagement, I'm being told by the professor here that I'm overshot. So those are the steps, and you find these on the website for debt financiers. On JV, we also have steps that we have to follow with our assistants. Then finally, what are the documents that are available for investors to look at? As I said, we've got a handbook that's going to be uploaded on the ministry's website, and we would also want it to be uploaded on the individual institutions' websites. We are also going to be producing an information memorandum in the next 2 weeks that gives more detail to the requirements of the institutions. Then any additional information that is required will be available to provide. Thank you. Thank you for your listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, and for keeping time too. Well, it is now my pleasure, as you have already heard from the previous speaker, we should now move on to Dawn Properties, presented by Mr. J. Dowa, Managing Director of Dawn Properties. He will tell us or give us what they have done on feasibility studies. Where is he? Is he around? Oh, please. Sorry, I'm looking all over. I see you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Professor, for that introduction. Your Excellency, the President of the Republic of Zimbabwe and Chancellor of State Universities, Comrade E.D. Mnangagwa, all protocol observed. We have very limited time, so I shall immediately dive into the work that we've done. So we as Dawn Property Consultancy are doing the feasibility study for these facilities that are required by the institutions of higher learning. So we will identify the opportunities and we'll also talk to the feasibility from our point of view as far as we've taken the study. Okay, so firstly what we did was look at the requirements by institution. So I've got a lot of data there, but fortunately, as my colleague from CBZ has already indicated, there is an investor booklet that is available and is going to be uploaded on the ministry's website. So all that information, as you can see, there's a lot there, is actually available in that booklet. So what we've identified from the study that we've done is basically 22 categories of facilities that are required by the institutions, and that ranges from lecture theaters, multi-purpose halls, student accommodation, sports pavilions, clinics, and the list goes on. And that, we've only looked at 31 state-owned institutions. And at this point, I'd like to acknowledge the privately owned institutions who also fall under the ministry, and also require certain facilities, but we haven't done any work in respect of what their needs are. So that's polytechnical colleges. We've actually just broken down the institutions by the different types. Teachers' colleges, industrial training colleges. Again, that data is in the investor booklet by institution. In terms of the priorities, the institutions, again, have spelled out what their priorities are, and that's contained in the investor booklet that's being uploaded on the ministry's website. Innovation hubs, and I think Honorable Minister Murure has spoken about that, is obviously a big ambition for the ministry, as they see that as a way that will drive both research and innovation and lead to industrialization and economic growth for our country. But ultimately, again, as the minister already indicated, is that we see these universities as being either managing to develop themselves into mini towns with self-sustaining ecosystems, or it could be that, in fact, they might be the engine room for growth in the towns in which they are based. Costs. Okay. So again, I think my colleague from CBZ has already indicated that we're looking to raise about $3.2 billion. Those are the costs that we've managed to assemble at this point in time to cover those facilities that I indicated in the first few slides that I showed you. And they're broken down, obviously, by the different types by the different categories of institutions, from universities down to the industrial training colleges. So, is this feasible? Can it be done? So we've looked, obviously, at various inputs that make it possible to be able to achieve the outcomes. So firstly, is availability of land. This information, again, will be able to pass on to the ministry and for them to upload on their website through CBZ, is that there's obviously, depending on the maturity of the institution, a various amount of land that's available to be developed. So we've looked at what the total hectares is and what percentage is actually open for development. The more mature the institutions, the less they need, and obviously the less land they have because they've built over time. The newer institutions clearly have plenty of land, so some have as high as 100%. And obviously land is a key resource that's required in this instance. It's in fact, the base raw material for us to be able to go forward. So again, looking by different institutions, polytechnics, teachers' colleges, industrial training colleges. So we've done everything. We have an idea of how much land is available. And then moving on to the availability of infrastructure by institutions. So fortunately, in this instance, all our institutions are in sort of urban settings. So most of the services are available for connection, as you see from that table there. And the ticks represent availability. The X's represent where it's not available. So most of the services are there. So from water, municipal, and boreholes, in most instances, the institutions have gone ahead and actually installed boreholes. Sewer connectivity, again, is not an issue. Roads, generally they have roads which are surfaced. And in terms of power, most of them are on grid. In fact, all of them are on grid, and most of them have backup power. So again, polytechnical colleges, teachers' colleges, and industrial training colleges. So very minor issues there, as I indicated before. So then moving on to the actual financial viability, which is where we spent some time looking. Again, probably a bit difficult to read, but I'll give you what the results are, and I'll give them in general. So what we've done is paid particular attention to student accommodation because we believe that is an area of greatest need, and certainly in discussions with the institutions, that's the feedback that we've gotten. So we've looked at that, so we've treated that separately probably from the other facilities because we think it's the lowest hanging fruit, and we expect the investor community to certainly be excited about the opportunity there. The results are indeed quite positive, and what we've done in our financial modeling is looked at the extremes of 100% equity and 100% debt, and modeling cash flows over a 25-year period, as my colleague from CBZ has already indicated. So in terms of the results, the NPVs, so for 100% equity, the NPVs are generally positive, as you can see, those who can read the slides, and the IRRs are ranging from about 11.6% to as high as 21%. So I think that's a very exciting opportunity. The payback is about 7.4 years to 12.5 years, which is, I think, quite acceptable for the asset class. In terms of debt, obviously the picture is not so rosy there, but I guess if you've actually haven't put in $1 and make a profit, you've probably done quite well. But the NPVs there are largely negative, and the IRRs range from negative, in some instances it's just not paying enough, up to about 12.6%. And the payback periods using 100% debt range from about 12.6 years. So if you do that, then you're doing quite well. And in some instances, it's actually a bit difficult to do. But again, then in the middle, obviously, lies the option of debt and equity and how that is structured. I think CBZ would be able to help. So just for the polytechnics, as I go through the slides there, industrial training colleges. Okay. Then finally, what we did was looked at the other facilities that are required by the institutions. So like I said, there's 22 of them. Student accommodation is only about 1, so there's 21 others that needed to be looked at. And in that instance, what we did was we actually modeled Lupane State University, represented obviously ably by Vice Chancellor, who's sitting next to me there. So what we did there is just looked at what it means, and we grouped certain facilities by alignment of use. So obviously, learning facilities are learning facilities. Basically, the model should be the same in terms of how the cost of construction in some ways and how the revenue is actually generated. So that's what we did and identified about 7 odd categories that we modeled there. I must say that obviously there's a fair bit of work to be done here because we just looked at it plain vanilla, nothing fancy. So we need to obviously engage a little bit with our colleagues at CBZ to see, and with the ministries as well, to see what incentives can be given to make this work. Because the revenue side is clearly a challenge and something that we need to work on and get right. But assuming if what we target is IRRs of obviously between 10 and 15% for 25 years in US dollars, which we think should be attractive to most investors, and payback periods of around about 10 years. And sorry, that's basically it that I had to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed for that. We now come to the next item, which is educational loan system financing inclusive education schemes. I hear Mr. Junior is not here. Instead, we are having Mr. Sam Mtamuko. Thank you very much, please.
Thank you, Professor, and very good morning to all. Your Excellency, the President of Zimbabwe and the Chancellor of all state universities, Comrade E.D. Mnangagwa, all protocols observed. I've been given strictly 5 minutes, so I'll try to speak within the 5 minutes that I've been given. I'm representing Zimbabwe Bankers Association. And as you might be aware, the banking sector has played a critical role in terms of student financing. I'm going to be talking about the student loan facility that has been availed to university students and tertiary students by the Banking Association in conjunction with the government of Zimbabwe. I think as a way of background, student loans by nature are supposed to be revolving, and previously the government used to provide student grants. They were unfortunately abolished due to, I think, inflation and just the poor repayment. They were replaced by the student cadetship, but again, it wasn't also very effective. What the government has since done in conjunction with the banks, they've actually introduced a facility in 2017, which is actually funded jointly by the government and as well as the banking community. There are quite a number of participating banks that are actually shown on that slide. We've got NMB, POSB, ZB, CBZ. There are 2 microfinance institutions, I think realizing the fact that